Iceland is a land of fire and ice, of volcanic ridgelines, glacial rivers, and steaming geothermal valleys. In July 2024, I set out on a 5-day self-guided through hike of the Laugavegur and Fimmvörðuháls trails, covering over 50 miles through Iceland's southern highlands. This is the story of that journey. 4 days of backpacking, 5 nights of camping, and one unforgettable adventure. Whether you're planning your own trek or just curious about what it's like to hike through some of the most dramatic scenery on Earth, I'll take you day by day through the experience, sharing trail tips, campsite info, meals, and the moments that made this trip so memorable. Day 0. Getting to Landmannalaugar. The journey began with a flight into Reykjavik and a ride on the Trek's Highland bus, a rugged, mountain-ready coach that picked us up right outside City Hall at 12:30 p.m. It's a long drive, about 4 hours across lava fields, gravel roads, and glacial outwash plains before you finally roll into the colorful rhyolite valley of Landmannalaugar. We checked into the campground, which I paid $21 to camp at, pitched our tents on the volcanic rock, and made sure to enjoy the hot springs nestled near the edge of the lava field. A swimsuit is a must here, and it's worth arriving with enough time to soak in before the crowds. It's the perfect way to relax before a big trek and after a long journey to get here. If you forgot anything, there's this really cool little spot called the Mountain Mall where you can buy snacks, meals, beer, and even some emergency gear. We spent our evening organizing our packs, talking with other hikers, and watching the midnight sun cast soft golden light across the lava fields. You really start to feel the magic of the trail here, even before you take a single step. And I know I've already mentioned the hot springs, but really just trust me whenever I say that making the decision to spend a night at Landmannalaugar so that we could enjoy the hot springs before starting our trek is maybe the best decision that we made. Day 1. Landmannalaugar to Álftavatn. We hit the trail on July 6th under bluebird skies. This first section is often considered the most striking, traversing geothermal vents, obsidian lava flows, and vibrant hills in every shade of ochre and green. As we climbed out of Landmannalaugar, we gained over 2,100 feet of elevation up and over the pass at Hrafntinneskur, snow still lingering even in midsummer. The landscape felt otherworldly, desolate, raw, and wildly alive, despite the distinct lack of wildlife. We gained over 2,100 feet of elevation as we climbed up out of the Landmannalaugar Valley. Gradually, as the day wore on, Stripes, Amanda, and I drifted apart, each taking time to reflect and enjoy the scenery in this landscape that felt like it was straight out of a space movie. Honestly, it was unlike anything any of us had ever seen, and my breath was taken away from me at every turn. I eventually caught up with Amanda because she had stopped to take a break near the highest point of our day. We chatted for a moment and then agreed to meet at Hrafntinneskur hut for lunch. Carrying on, we were crossing vast, flat highlands with snow still lingering and geothermal steam venting up out of holes in the ground. I marveled at signs warning that the water here could be 80 to 100 degrees Celsius, which translates to 176 to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Absolutely unfathomable. Amanda and I stopped for lunch at Hrafntinneskur hut, which is the first hut along the Laugavegur trek. Many people stay here their first night, but we were pretty glad that we pushed on. The hut was nice, don't get me wrong, but the accommodations here were super exposed, the tent pads were less than desirable, and we were happy to push on to a better campsite for the night. Leaving the hut, we passed through lots of open snow fields with rotten, melting snow. We also passed the second of 2 memorials, memorializing 2 men who lost their lives on this particular section of the trail. Their lives were lost due to accidents and inclement weather. It's a stark reminder that while the weather may be mild today, that can change in an instant, and this place is not to be underestimated. Our final challenge of the day was navigating a couple of river crossings, which turned out not to be too bad. We managed the river crossings by rock hopping or changing into our Crocs, and were eventually able to finally start our descent into the Álftavatn Lake Valley. Arriving at Altavatan, the restaurant was one of the most welcome sights I think I've ever seen. I was so stoked to get a nice, warm, hot, delicious meal. So Amanda and I promptly set up my tent and she checked into her hut. We changed into dry clothes and immediately parked our butts in a restaurant chair and had one of the best meals I might have ever had in my entire life. I don't think I realized before I set out to do this trek that I would probably be able to buy beer at every single campsite, but that is what ended up happening. And I'm here to say that I am not complaining about it because there is nothing quite like a brew at the end of a long hiking day to just really round out the experience. Amanda and I were so tired after our long day and the adrenaline of our first full day on trail that we really didn't stay up very late. We ended up eating dinner and then crashing pretty hard. You may have noticed that we began our hike at Landmannalaugar with 3 hikers and ended at Altavatan at the end of day 1 with only 2. Unfortunately, during the day, one of my hiking partners, my longtime traveling and trekking companion Stripes, became ill. She had to turn back and ended up taking a bus back to Reykjavik to spend a couple of days in town recovering. Amanda and I made the difficult decision to continue on without her. We'll be meeting back up with Stripes at Bizarre to continue our hike as a group on the Fimmvörðuháls trail. Until then, Amanda and I will continue the Laugavegur trek without her. On day 2, we walked from Altavatan to Imstur Hut. We left some of the highland scenery behind and entered the black sand deserts. We hiked a total of 9.8 miles with only 548 feet of gain, but the mental challenge was still real. The open plains are vast and exposed, and strong winds are common. At one point, we even crossed a glacial river barefoot. I waded thigh deep through icy water, causing my feet to go completely numb for a few minutes after. The contrast from day 1 was stark. No more vibrant hills, just endless black earth and glacial runoff cutting through the landscape. Still, the rhythm of the hike set in. We stopped frequently for snacks, took time to appreciate the silence, and I let my body fall into the pace of the trail. There were long stretches without a whole lot to look at, just walking on black gravel under an endless sky. We rolled into Imstur by early afternoon, the day's gentle grade lending itself to a fairly quick pace. We both grabbed a beer and sat on the hut's porch, mingling with some other guests for a while. We were starving, so we decided to split an extra backpacking meal Amanda was carrying as an appetizer. A bit later, after a few more beers, we cooked a proper dinner in the mess tent and called it a night early. I fell asleep to the gentle flapping of tent fabric in the wind. Day 3, Imstur to Bezar. This was a long and varied day, 11.5 miles and over 1,100 foot of gain. We left the volcanic desert behind and entered the green valleys leading to Thorsmork, the forest of Thor. The trail here skirts deep gorges and climbs rocky ridgelines with panoramic views of glaciers and distant volcanoes. Wildflowers bloomed across the valley, and we passed a few smaller creeks along the way, some easy to cross with stepping stones, others requiring a little finesse. One of the day's highlights came early on, as we climbed down into a deep gorge to cross a raging river on a footbridge. Amanda and I both agreed that this was one of the best views and one of the coolest sights that we had seen so far on the trip. And that is saying a lot because this hike is nothing except dramatic view after dramatic view. Amanda and I spent most of the day hiking together on this 3rd day of the trail, a change from our normal go our own pace, see ya at camp attitude. We probably did this subconsciously, knowing that we wouldn't be camping together later in the day. This would be the one night where Amanda and I would sleep at different campsites. Her at Laugavegur Hut and me at Bezar campsite. I would also later be meeting up with Stripes at Bezar as she came back out into the highlands to do the last day of the hike with us after recovering from her illness. I would stay at Bizarre tonight, a campsite that I booked for $17 in a cozy, well-sheltered area beneath tall birch trees. Yes, you heard that right. I said trees. This was the first spot that we could really start to feel the transition to Iceland's lowlands. Thorsmork was a lush green oasis compared to the volcanic, rocky, dusty hike that we had been on for the last several days. But don't be fooled into thinking that the work is over. We may have dropped down low into the Thorsmork Valley to sleep tonight, but tomorrow we'll be climbing right back up into the land of fire and ice. Now, back to the hike today. After many, many, many ups and downs, we did finally start to descend down into the valley. We stopped for a snack and lo and behold, spotted a three-legged fox. This was an absolutely unexpected surprise, and we really didn't know what to think about her. It seems as though she somehow has survived this wild, rugged, and hostile environment, even despite having a pretty debilitating injury. I wasn't expecting to see any wildlife at all on this hike, and spotting her was totally unexpected, but also really, really cool. Finally, an end was in sight. We crossed a glacial river just before entering Thorsmork National Park, and it was absolutely mind-boggling how the scenery changed so dramatically after crossing into the national park. We went from flat lands and volcanic rock to lush green insects, butterflies, and even some birds singing. Amanda and I both marveled at the dramatic shift and enjoyed stopping and looking at the wildflowers as we passed through the national park headed toward our campsites for the night. Finally, we reached Langidulur, where Amanda stopped for the night and ate dinner, and I eventually headed on over to Basar, crossing yet another glacial river on a series of metal rolling footbridges to reach the opposite side and hike into my campsite. Here, I met up with Stripes, who had taken another one of the Highlands buses into the campsite for the night. She and I enjoyed a hot meal at the restaurant at Basar and caught up on things that had happened for both of us since we split up a few days prior. If your hike-ins here, there are a couple of optional side trails worth exploring. Thorsmork National Park offers a plethora of incredible hiking trails for you to check out. However, our journey didn't end here. Tomorrow, we would face our most challenging and arguably our most scenic day yet of the entire trek. Day 4, the Fimmvörðuháls Trail, Thorsmork National Park to Skógafoss. This final stretch was our biggest day yet. 15.4 miles and nearly 3,000 feet of climbing up and over Fimmvörðuháls, a pass between two glaciers, whose names I will not even begin to try to pronounce. The name Fimmvörðuháls means five cairn pass, and you begin to understand why as you follow stone markers across the volcanic ridgelines and wind-blasted plateaus of the higher sections of this hike. However, at the beginning, it's hard to believe that in just a few short hours, you'll be post-holing through snow. Early on, we are captivated by the views down into the canyon below and back across the valley that we had just climbed out of. Up ahead, our first challenge for the day would await us. First up, the infamous cat spine, a narrow ridge that drops off steeply on both sides. I thought this was one of the neater sections of our entire hike, offering absolutely dramatic views and a breathtaking kind of exhilaration that only comes from feeling like you might be just a tiny bit closer to death than you were a few moments before. Our next challenge was navigating a set of cliffs with cables in which you traversed along a really narrow path on the edge of a cliff, clinging to metal cables that were pounded into the rocks. I, again, thought this section was rather exhilarating, but my hiking partners were a little bit sketched out by it. The climb is absolutely relentless, and the landscape shifts fast. We climbed steadily for hours, stopping often to catch our breath and marvel at just how insane the terrain around us was, and how quickly it had gone from lush green to volcanic rock and ash-covered snow. The wind howled, and from the top of the plateau, we could feel the raw power of the elements all around us. And add to that, the sketchiness was not totally behind us yet. We passed between two volcanoes and crossed numerous snowfields, including navigating one particularly scary washout situation, before finally reaching Baldvinskali Hut, where we took a break for a couple of hours to dry our feet out and eat a warm meal before continuing on with our day. From Baldvinskali, the trip is pretty much all downhill. Nearly 4,000 feet of descent from up high in the highlands all the way to the ocean. And let me tell you, it is absolutely magical. There are dozens of waterfalls cascading down the steep Skóga River canyon. We encountered a dense, spitting mist early on. However, it could not dampen my mood at all. Even though it was getting late and I was absolutely exhausted from the long and treacherous day we'd already had, I couldn't help but stop and marvel at every single waterfall that we passed. And let me tell you, there were so many. One thing about Iceland in the summer is that it never truly gets dark, and as we descended toward Skógafoss, it got pretty late in the day. In fact, most of the videos that you see here were taken between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. at night, and you can see just how light it still is outside. We didn't actually finish our hike until almost 11 p.m., and thankfully, whenever we arrived in Skógar, the restaurant was still open because that was where we had planned to have dinner. They were no longer doing dinner service, but they did have a steaming pot of mushroom soup, which we all indulged in, as well as warm bread with Icelandic butter. The campsite fees at Skógafoss were about $24, and we opted to crash there and take the morning Trex bus back to Reykjavik. Something important to remember about this campsite is that there is no hut here. So Amanda actually had to carry a tent the entire way, even though she stayed in huts at all of the other sites, just so that she could camp at this one site. Even so, I'm telling you, I don't think that there is a single campsite in the world that can top waking up at the base of Skógafoss. This waterfall was the absolute most iconic culmination to one of the most epic treks I probably will ever complete in my lifetime. If you're dreaming of hiking across Iceland, I hope this video and itinerary help make it feel a little bit more doable. I encourage you to let yourself daydream, plan the route, pack the snacks, and get going. You'll never regret giving yourself the chance to experience something this absolutely incredibly beautiful.